Ended. Karen looked exhausted but still defiant. "We demand that you take responsibility for the flooding," she said as soon as I walked in. "You own the land above us. You control the water." I leaned on the table, calm. "You demolished the structure that controlled the water. I warned you it was a dam, not a ditch." One of the board members spoke up. "There must be a way to fix this. Can't you rebuild it?" "Sure," I said. "With permits, engineering, and about $600,000. But since you destroyed it without authorization, you'll be footing that bill, not me." Karen slammed her clipboard. "We were protecting the community." I smiled. "Then protect it now." The room went silent. A few days later, the county's investigation confirmed everything I'd said. The HOA had no legal authority to alter the dam. Their demolition violated multiple state water management laws. The insurance companies refused to cover the flood damages, citing negligent interference with a regulated structure. Within a month, the Silverbrook HOA was bankrupt. Homeowners sued the board for mismanagement. Karen was removed as president, then later charged with reckless endangerment and property destruction. As for me, the county eventually approved my request to rebuild the dam, properly this time, with reinforced concrete and automated gates. I even secured a grant for watershed restoration. When construction finished, the lake filled again, calm, clear, and beautiful. The reflection of the mountains returned, just as before. Only now, the southern shore where Silverbrook once stood was mostly empty. A few homes remained, but many had been condemned or sold at auction. The HOA dissolved, and the land reverted to the county. Sometimes, when I walk along the ridge at sunset, I think about the day they tore down my dam. The arrogance, the greed, the blind certainty that their authority outweighed the truth. I remember Karen's voice echoing in my ears. "We're protecting the community." Maybe in a twisted way, she did. The flood washed away not just houses, but the illusion of control they'd built around themselves. Last month, I received a letter, and signed, but I knew who it was from. It said, "You ruined everything." I folded it neatly and tossed it into the lake. The ripples spread out, quiet and perfect, fading into the water that had always belonged to me. Because some lessons, like the power of nature and the limits of arrogance, have to be learned the hard way. When I first bought the land out by Clearbrook Valley, people thought I was out of my mind. The property was old farmland that had been split and sold decades ago, and what I bought wasn't even a house. It was a stretch of uneven hills, a half-drained lake, and an aging concrete dam that most people didn't even know existed. But I saw potential. The old dam, built in the 1960s by a man named Merritt Hayes, still stood proud at the mouth of a narrow gorge. It wasn't pretty, but it was sturdy, designed to hold back the runoff from the surrounding mountains and create Lake Mirren, a small, calm lake that shimmered like glass when the light hit it just right. The first time I saw it, the afternoon sun bounced off the surface of the water like a mirror, and the entire valley looked alive. That view sold me. I spent my savings on the property and the adjoining ridge that overlooked the lake. I built a modest cabin up there, surrounded by pines and maples. It wasn't much, but it was peaceful. No traffic, no city noise, just the hum of water spilling through the old dam. Below the ridge, tucked neatly into the valley, was a modern neighborhood called Silverbrook Estates, a cluster of identical beige houses wrapped around perfectly cut lawns and ornamental mailboxes. It was the kind of place where every yard had to look the same, and every neighbor was expected to smile on cue. They were proud of their order. They had an HOA, of course, Silverbrook Homeowners Association, which controlled everything from paint colors to how higher grass could grow. The HOA didn't own the lake. They didn't own the dam. But their development bordered the water, and they'd always treated it like a community amenity, kayaking in summer, hosting barbecues by the shore, and holding their annual fireworks show over the lake every July. When I moved in, I didn't mind. They were quiet, polite, and I wasn't the kind of man to hoard nature. For the first couple of years, things were fine. I'd wave to the people walking their dogs along the lake trail. Sometimes they'd bring their kids to fish by the shore, and I'd give them permission if they asked. Everyone seemed to understand the boundary. Until she showed up. Her name was Karen Lockhart, and she became HOA president the same year the trouble started. Karen wasn't content to maintain order. She wanted control. She was the kind of woman who spoke in rules, not sentences. She'd walk around with her clipboard, correcting people's recycling bins, measuring their fences, telling contractors to park in approved areas. I first met her when she drove up my gravel road in a shiny white SUV and stepped out in heels, completely out of place in the mud and pine needles. "Mr. Hale?" she said, looking at her notes. "That's me," I answered, leaning on the fence. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "I'm the new HOA president for Silverbrook Estates. I wanted to discuss the lake arrangement." "What arrangement?" "Well," she said, flipping a page on her clipboard, "as you know, the lake is part of the Silverbrook community. The HOA has certain maintenance and insurance obligations regarding the shoreline. Since you own the dam that regulates our water level, we believe it's fair that you contribute to the community upkeep fund." I laughed out loud. "Ma'am, I don't live in Silverbrook. The lake and the dam are my private property." She tilted her head. "You benefit from the same ecosystem as the rest of us. It's only right that everyone pays their share. We can't have freeloaders." That word, freeloader, stuck with me. I wanted to tell her that my taxes already covered the watershed, that my father had taught me how to clear floodgates long before her HOA existed, that I spent my weekends maintaining the dam at my own cost. But I didn't. I just said, "You have no authority here," and walked away. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail, an invoice from Silverbrook HOA. Annual dues, $2,500. Due immediately. Failure to pay may result in administrative action. I nearly laughed myself sick. I called the number on the letter. Karen answered. "This must be a mistake," I said. "I'm not a member." "No mistake," she said sweetly. "You control a structure that affects the safety of our neighborhood. That makes you a stakeholder." "A stakeholder doesn't mean a member," I said. "And I didn't sign anything." She paused. "Well, perhaps you should have. We expect cooperation." I hung up. After that, the harassment began. HOA volunteers started leaving pamphlets on my gate about community hazards. One claimed my dam was an unregulated risk. Another warned of potential collapse due to neglect. They called the county twice, trying to have it inspected. Both times, the inspectors left satisfied. The dam was stable. When their reports didn't go their way, the HOA upped the pressure. They posted signs near the lake that said, "Private HOA property, no trespassing." I took them down. They put them back. It became a silent war of stubbornness. Then, one rainy April morning, I woke to the rumble of engines. From my porch, I could see 3 heavy construction vehicles parked at the base of the dam, orange cones everywhere, men in reflective vests unloading equipment. I grabbed my coat and sprinted down the hill. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Karen turned, umbrella in hand, looking far too pleased. "We're addressing an ongoing safety hazard. Your dam has been deemed non-compliant with HOA safety codes." "Hagot?" I barked. "This isn't HOA land." Her smile was thin. "We've given you multiple notices. You failed to pay dues and ignored requests for inspection. The board has voted to remove the unsafe structure before it endangers residents." "You can't." But before I could finish, one of the workers struck a chunk of the concrete spillway with a jackhammer. The sound cracked through the air like thunder, and I yelled for them to stop, but they kept going. I called the sheriff, but by the time a deputy arrived 30 minutes later, they had opened a gash in the spillway wide enough for water to surge through. A muddy torrent began spilling into the stream below. The deputy ordered them off the property, but the damage was irreversible. Within a week, water levels dropped 6 feet. By the end of the month, the lake was a muddy crater, littered with fish bones and rotting reeds, and I was furious. My lawyer sent cease and desist letters, but the HOA dismissed them, claiming community action under safety protocol. They thought they'd won. The homeowners applauded Karen for protecting their neighborhood. But they didn't understand what that dam really did. It wasn't just decoration, it was control. The structure regulated runoff from 5 miles of mountain streams. Without it, Every major storm would have nowhere to go but downhill. I tried to warn them. I wrote to the county water management office, filed reports, begged them to intervene. But bureaucracy moves slower than water, and by summer, the valley had already dried out. Homeowners complained the smell and mosquitoes. Karen accused me of intentionally neglecting the property. I kept my head down. I patched what I could. I figured nature would eventually teach them what paperwork wouldn't. Then, that September, the rain came. The forecast called it a seasonal front, but it was more like a monsoon. 3 days of constant rain. The soil turned to soup. The small creeks feeding into the valley became raging brown rivers. I stood on my porch, watching the runoff flow through the channels that used to feed the lake. The water raced downhill, gathering speed. By the second night, Silverbrook streets had turned into rivers. Cars floated. Lawns vanished beneath swirling water. Their perfect landscaping dissolved in a single storm. The next morning, I drove down the ridge, just to see how bad it was. What I saw made my stomach twist. The old lake bed had refilled, only now it overflowed. Water lapped at the backyards of the lowest houses, creeping toward front doors. People were hauling sandbags, shouting, wading through knee-deep floods, and there, in a yellow raincoat, barking orders, was Karen. She spotted me instantly. "You," she shouted, pointing. "This is your fault." "I satte her, dumfundel." "My fault? You tore down the dam. You should have rebuilt it. You knew this could happen." I couldn't help but laugh. "You said it was a safety hazard. Congratulations, you got rid of it. How's that working out for you?" Her face flushed red. "You'll pay for this." I turned my truck around and left her standing ankle-deep in muddy water. That night, I could hear sirens echoing through the valley. The rain didn't stop. Around midnight, the last storm cell hit. Hard. I watched from the ridge as the water rose higher, swallowing streetlights one by one. By dawn, Silverbrook was a lake again. Only this time, the houses sat beneath the surface. When the county declared a state of emergency, I offered access to my property so rescue boats could launch from the ridge. Dozens of residents were evacuated. The next day, the county engineer visited the site and quickly realized what had happened. The HOA had tampered with their regulated water control structure without permission. News crews arrived by afternoon. One headline read, "Community flooded after unauthorized dam demolition." Karen tried to hold a press conference, insisting she'd acted in the community's best interest. But when the reporters asked for permits, she had none. Within a week, lawsuits piled up from every direction. Homeowners suing the HOA, the county filing charges for environmental negligence, and me filing for property damage and unlawful destruction. The HOA bank account was drained in legal fees before winter. Their insurance refused to pay out a dime, citing gross misconduct. Karen lost her home to foreclosure. As for me, I won my case. The court ruled in my favor, ordered the HOA to pay restitution for the dam's destruction, and granted me full authority to rebuild under county supervision. It took nearly 2 years, but I rebuilt Lake Mirren. The new dam was a beauty, stronger, automated, reinforced with steel gates and sensors that adjusted for rainfall. The county even helped fund it, grateful to prevent future disasters. When the lake finally refilled, it was as if nothing had happened, except that the lower half of Silverbrook no longer existed. Many lots were condemned, left to return to marshland. The few houses that survived stood on the edge of what was now legally designated Mirren Wetlands Reserve, owned by me. One evening, months after everything settled, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset ripple across the water when I noticed an envelope tucked under my gate. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten, "You destroyed everything we built." No signature, but I knew the handwriting that I folded it neatly and tossed it into the lake. The paper floated for a moment, then sank beneath the surface, lost to the water she'd tried to control. Now, whenever I look at that calm expanse of blue, I think about what power and pride can do to people. How something as simple as a dam, a wall of concrete holding back nature, can become a mirror for human arrogance. They thought they could own what wasn't theirs. They thought authority meant ownership. But nature doesn't care about bylaws, and when the water came for them, it didn't ask for permission. When I bought the land at the north edge of Clearbrook Valley, most people thought I was wasting my money. The property wasn't impressive. 200 acres of rolling hills, tangled brush, a patchy gravel road that twisted up to a half-collapsed cabin, and a tired old dam that no one had touched in decades. But when I stood on that ridge and looked down at the glimmer of Lake Mirren, I knew it was mine. It wasn't just a patch of earth, it was peace. The kind of peace you can't buy in a suburb or a city. The kind that hums in the wind and reflects in the still water below. The dam itself was the real reason I bought the land. Built in 1961 by an engineer named Merritt Hayes, it was a small but solid structure that held back runoff from the surrounding mountains. For 60 years, it had controlled the water that fed the Clearbrook Valley. Over time, the farmland below had been sold to developers, and eventually, a homeowners association called Silverbrook Estates took root along the southern bank of the lake. I'd seen their real estate ads online. Luxury lakefront living, they said. None of them mentioned that the lake didn't belong to them. When I moved in, I didn't mind the neighbors. They were far enough away that I barely heard them, and most of the homeowners were polite when they saw me at the local market. They enjoyed the lake. I enjoyed the solitude. It was an easy coexistence. For the first 2 years, no one from Silverbrook ever bothered me. Then came the election of a new HOA president, Karen Lockhart. Karen was a force of nature, the bad kind. Always perfectly dressed, always carrying a clipboard, always smiling in a way that never reached her eyes. I first met her one bright Saturday morning when she drove her spotless SUV at my dirt driveway and parked like she owned the place. I was repairing a fence by the waterline when she stepped out in heels that sank an inch into the mud. "Mr. Hale," she called, her tone clipped but polite. "That's me," I said, straightening up. She extended a hand, which I didn't take right away. "I'm Karen Lockhart, president of the Silverbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I wanted to have a friendly conversation about your dam." "My dam?" "Yes," she said. "The board has some concerns. You see, it regulates the water levels for the entire community. It's technically part of the lake ecosystem that borders our neighborhood." I shrugged. "Sure, but it's on my property. The dam and the water it holds are private land according to my deed." Karen smiled that politician smile. "Of course. But we all benefit from it, don't we? The lake raises property values, provides recreation, even irrigation runoff. We just think it's fair that you contribute to our maintenance fund." "I'm not part of your HOA." "You could be," she said smoothly. "We'd be happy to welcome you. Then everything stays organized and cooperative." "Not interested." Her smile faltered for a split second before returning like a mask snapping into place. "Well, I do hope you'll reconsider. Cooperation is important around here." With that, she turned and clicked back to her SUV, leaving tire tracks all the way down my road. A week later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox, an invoice from Silverbrook HOA for $2,500 labeled annual dues and maintenance fees. Beneath it was a warning. Failure to pay may result in enforcement action. I laughed, tossed it in the trash, and went back to my work. That was my first mistake. Within weeks, I started getting reminder notices. Then came letters accusing me of neglecting community infrastructure. Someone even left flyers on my gate warning of potential dam failure. It was obvious Karen was behind it. I ignored them all. Then, one afternoon, I noticed a county truck idling by the base of the dam. 2 inspectors stood there, clipboards in hand. I walked down to meet them. "Something wrong?" I asked. "Routine inspection," one said. "We got a report from the Silverbrook HOA that your dam might be compromised." I sighed. "It's not. But you're welcome to look." They inspected every inch. A week later, I got the report structurally sound. Not perfect, but safe. I mailed a copy straight to the HOA office with a sticky note that said, "Problem solved." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't a month later, another envelope arrived. This one marked final notice. The letter inside accused me of failure to maintain community property and refusal to pay mandatory assessments. They even threatened to pursue enforcement through authorized action. I called Karen. "You're harassing me?" I said. "I'm not paying a dime to your HOA. You're benefiting from our community resources," she said coolly. "Our board has decided you owe dues. It's non-negotiable. You don't have authority over me or this land. We'll see about that." The call ended. For a while, things went quiet. Then came the rumbling that it was a Tuesday morning in late April when I woke to the sound of machinery, diesel engines, clanking metal, shouting voices. From my porch, I could see orange vests glinting in the distance. My stomach dropped. By the time I reached the dam, 3 excavators were lined up along the concrete wall. A crew was unloading jackhammers. Karen stood nearby, holding her clipboard like a sword. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. She turned calmly. "We're executing a community safety order. Your dam has been declared hazardous. The board voted to remove it before it called up SES. You can't touch that. This is private property." Her expression hardened. "We've warned you. You refuse to comply, refuse to pay fees, refuse to maintain the structure. We're protecting our residents. By destroying a dam?" She didn't answer. She gave a nod to the foreman, and the jackhammer started. The sound was deafening. Chunks of concrete flew into the air as water began seeping through cracks that had been sealed for decades. I screamed for them to stop. By the time sheriff's deputies arrived an hour later, they'd opened a 6-foot gash in the spillway. Water gushed through like a released beast. The deputies halted the work, but the damage was already irreversible. Within 3 days, the lake level dropped by half. Fish lay stranded in the mud. The air stank of decay. I called every lawyer in the county, but no one wanted to take on an HOA without ironclad evidence. Karen claimed they acted under Community Emerge and CY protocol. By summer, the lake was gone. Just cracked earth and reeds. Silverbrook residents started complaining about mosquitoes, smell, and declining property values. And yet Karen walked around like a hero. She even held a community safety celebration at the dried lake bed. I stopped going into town. I couldn't look at what used to be my lake. Then came the rains that fall. Clearbrook saw the worst storms in 20 years. The valley turned into a funnel, channeling every drop from the mountains straight into what used to be Lake Mirren. But without the dam, there was nothing to hold it back. It started with puddles on driveways. Then the water crept into lawns. Then into garages. I watched from my ridge as the valley floor shimmered under sheets of rain. Within hours, Silverbrook's pristine streets were rivers. I drove down to check the damage. People were running around with buckets and sandbags. Cars half submerged. The water was rising fast. And there, standing in a yellow poncho, yelling orders like a field marshal, was Karen. "This is your fault," she screamed when she saw me. "You let this happen." "My fault," I shouted back. "You destroyed the dam. You should have rebuilt it." I almost laughed. "You tore it down without permission. The runoff has nowhere to go now. This is on you." Her eyes were wild. "You'll pay for this." I turned away. There was no point arguing with someone who'd rather drown than admit a mistake. That night, the rain didn't stop. The next morning, I looked out from my porch and saw nothing but water. The entire valley had become a lake again, only deeper, wider, and angrier than before. Silverbrook was gone. Roofs peeked out like islands. Emergency services came with boats. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters called it the Silverbrook flood. When the county engineers investigated, they found what I already knew. The flooding was a direct result of the HOA's demolition. Their unauthorized safety operation had destroyed a regulated structure that managed regional water flow. They'd broken environmental and civil engineering laws in one stroke. The lawsuits came next. Dozens of homeowners sued the HOA. Insurance companies refused to pay, citing negligence. The county filed charges for reckless endangerment. As for me, I filed my own lawsuit for destruction of private property. This time, I had all the evidence I needed: drone footage, inspection reports, and witness statements that took months, but justice came. The court ruled entirely in my favor. The HOA was ordered to pay restitution and penalties, and Karen Lockhart was personally charged with unlawful demolition of infrastructure and reckless endangerment. Silverbrook estates dissolved. Many homeowners declared bankruptcy. The once beautiful neighborhood became an abandoned floodplain. A year later, I finally got approval to rebuild the dam properly, this time reinforced with steel and monitored by the county. It took 2 seasons of work, but when it was done, the lake returned to its original glory. The new waterline gleamed under the sun, calm and steady. The southern shore, where Silverbrook once stood, was now government-designated wetland. The remaining houses were condemned, half-sunken ruins surrounded by reeds and cattails. Nature had reclaimed what arrogance had tried to own. One autumn afternoon, while walking near the water's edge, I noticed a small white envelope stuck under a stone. No return address. Inside, a single line written in neat, angry handwriting. "You ruined everything we built." I knew who it was from. I folded the note, looked out over the lake, and let the paper slip into the water. It floated a moment, then sank beneath the surface, vanishing into the quiet depths that had outlasted them all. Now, when storms roll through the valley, I stand by the dam and listen to the thunder. The gates hold steady. The water swells but never breaks. The structure stands strong, silent proof of who was right all along. Sometimes I think about Karen and her clipboard and the people who believed rules were stronger than nature. They thought the lake was theirs because they built around it. They thought paperwork could replace physics, but water doesn't care about bylaws. It doesn't care who signs the checks or who sits on the board. It flows where it wants to flow, and when pride tries to dam it up or tear it down, it always finds a way to remind people who's in charge. In the end, all it took was one storm to teach them what ownership really means. And every time the sun sets over Lake Mirren and the reflection of my rebuilt dam glows in the water, I remember that day. The day they destroyed it in the name of power, and the night the water came back to take its revenge.